Hello everyone, Sherry here. Welcome back to the next chapter. Tonight I am going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the empty nest syndrome. Many of us have experienced this or will experience this, and it can be a very, very difficult time. So I am going to talk a little bit about my experiences with empty nest syndrome and also share some strategies that have helped me to get through it. And I've come out on the other side much better and enjoying life again. So I do want to say before I begin that I am not a licensed therapist or psychiatrist or a psychologist. So if you feel that you are having a very difficult time getting through the empty nest, please seek the help of a professional. It's very important that you do that if you feel like that you're just not getting better or that you're getting worse. And also, before I get started, if you find this video helpful, if you would hit the like button and also hit subscribe, that's going to help to grow my channel. And also in the comments below, if you will, as we're going through this, if it rings a bell that a similar situation you've experienced or a strategy that you've used that maybe I do not talk about, if you would, please put that in the comment below. You don't have to share anything super personal, but it would be very helpful for me and others who might be watching this and reading the comments. So I would really appreciate if you would share. And also hit the notification bell so you will receive notifications when I post a new video. And at this point, I'm posting videos at least once a week, sometimes a couple times if you count the shorts that I put in there. So with that being said, let's get started talking about the empty nest syndrome. I'm going to start out by talking about my experience. I will say, before I start getting into my story, that everyone experiences the empty nest syndrome differently. And everybody experiences the empty nest syndrome differently with each child. Just because you experienced it one way with one child doesn't mean you're going to experience it the same way with the next child. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. And I'm going to try to cut these stories down because I could talk forever. You know how we parents are. We love to talk about our kids. So I'm going to talk about my oldest first, my first experience with empty nest. So the story about what happened with his father is I have already talked about that in another video. And actually I'll put up here the link to When Relationships End, if you want to go back and watch that story so you have a kind of a better understanding. But basically what happened, his father passed away, and I was a single mom for the first 9 years of my oldest son's life. So we literally grew up together. I was in my early 20s at that time, and just a lot of difficult things going on. New baby. And you know what it's like when you have a new baby, you sleepless nights, lots of crying, not knowing what to do with the first baby, all that happened. So I remember at one point, one night I was up in the middle of the night, just could not get him to sleep. And I remember thinking, I cannot wait until he is old enough to tell me what is wrong, because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And little did I know I would blink and yeah, the date would be there. But I just remember thinking that, and now looking back on that, having major guilt about wishing his life on into where he is now. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just know we all have moments of that. So I remarried when my oldest son was almost 9 years old. And that brought about a lot of changes. And then a couple years after that, we had his brother. So there is a 10-year difference between my sons. And I will say that that caused the empty nest to be very different experience than it happened with my youngest. Because when my oldest son was in going through school in his senior year, I was so involved with being the mother of two boys at totally different points in their life. I mean, I have a 17-year-old and a 7-year-old. Life was crazy at this point. I also worked at their school. This was a K through 12 campus, so I was able to be with them both through the most of their educational experience. So that was a blessing. But I remember going through a bunch of photo albums one evening. This was like, I don't know, a week before graduation, high school graduation. And I, of course, am looking through these pictures, and I'm seeing, the pictures of me holding him as a baby, and I'll insert some of those pictures up here. Just reminiscing on happy times and how fast it went. Just the typical things that we do. And all of a sudden, the grief hit like a ton of bricks. I was inconsolable. I cried and I cried and I cried. And I remember my youngest came in the living room where I was, and he said, "Mommy, what is wrong?" And he could not understand why I was looking at pictures and just bawling, just crying my eyes out. But it was at that time, because we have a tradition at our high school that the parents will make picture boards or PowerPoint presentations of their child's life up through graduation. So that's what I was working on. And it was so difficult. And I remember his last day of high school, I cried the entire day. I could not work because I was crying so much. And, remember, I'm at their school. I'm working in the high school office at that time. So I can't work. I'm a mess the entire day. I cried through his graduation. Couldn't enjoy it because I was so sad. So we get through graduation, and he decides to attend a university, which is literally 15 minutes down the road from our home. So because of that, he decides that he's going to live at home and just commute. Well, I was thrilled, because I'm thinking, yay, he's still going to be at home. So he attended that university and graduated 4 years later. And he remained in our home for about 6 months to a year after graduation, college graduation. And then he found his first full-time job, and he, at that point, decided to buy a home and move out. So that was my first experience with being an empty nester. And it wasn't the full experience because I still had a younger child at home. So I didn't, thank goodness, experience the full thrust of being thrown into an empty nest. I was able to gradually work my way into it. So he bought this beautiful home. I was excited to help him decorate, get him packed up into it. So I was caught up in all that. And the best part is that he only lived 10, 15 minutes from where our home was. And his brother and I were at his home 2, 3, 4 times a week because he was single. He was lonely. He wanted us to be there. So it was a wonderful transition for us. But I missed him like crazy. I remember going into his room and just... and I remember his brother going up to his room. He had an upstairs room, and he just being so sad because he missed his brother. But then we'd always go over to his house. But then about a year after he moved into his home, year or two later, he meets who is now his wife, and he gets married. So that's a whole different situation because we felt like it was okay for us to visit him whenever we wanted, when it was just him. But here's a newly married couple. The last thing I want to do is impose. So, and my daughter-in-law was wonderful about welcoming us at any point in time, but we knew we had to set boundaries for their sake, because they were starting a life together. So it was really, really hard when he married, and that we just did not have just free access anytime we wanted to go over there, basically. But we got through it, and thank goodness they live even closer. They bought another home a few years later, and they're happy, and it's wonderful to see them moving on with their life. And now I'll talk about the experience that I had with the younger son. So the younger son, I was able to stay home with him. I was fortunate enough, I had remarried. I was able to be home because my husband was able to provide for us financially. And so from the time my second son was born until the time he started school, he was with me 24/7. And we were very, very close because of that. And unfortunately, with my oldest son, I was in college full time. I had to work. I didn't have the luxury that I had with the younger one. So when it was time for him, I remember right shortly after he was born even, I remember thinking he's going to grow up so fast, because I'd already been through it and I knew how fast it was going to happen. So I'm already dreading it, Can't even enjoy the moment because I'm dreading what's going to happen, or might not even happen. So his first day of kindergarten, I blink and it's the first day of kindergarten. Now, granted, he's at the same school that his older brother is, because it's a K through 12 school. So I work there. It's not like I'm, down the street or whatever. I am there with both my boys. It's a perfect setup, but I'm a mess. I'm crying. I'm trying to not let him see me cry. He's crying. His dad is hiding tears because he's crying. So we're all just a complete mess. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, he finally has he's not crying every day. So that was really hard. But I remember thinking his whole kindergarten year, I'm going to blink and he's going to graduate. Okay, yeah, I could not enjoy myself. So he's a different kid than his older brother. His older brother was always more shy, was not as involved, even though he did play varsity tennis and he did drama and some other things like that. He had a circle of friends, but they did not do the social things that most teenagers do. So my younger son, on the other hand, was totally different. He was involved in everything, with the exception of sports. He was a sports official his senior year, but he did not play sports. But he was involved in clubs. He was involved in leadership. He wanted to do travel clubs. So his dad and I, the three of us, we experienced the world through the travel club those 4 years. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that with my older son because we had his younger brother at home at that point. So we had lots of opportunities to experience with my younger one that unfortunately we're not able to do with our older one because of the situation. So we blink, senior year's here, last day. Actually, I started working on his senior board like 2 months before, because I knew it was coming. I knew I'd be a mess because of what I experienced before. So, of course, I was a mess, going through pictures, reminiscing, just reliving the entire past. It was painful. But I survived. We get there. It's his last day of school, high school. And they do, for the first time in the history of the school, they do a senior walk. So basically what they do is they take the seniors dressed in their cap and gowns over to the elementary schools, because like I said, we're K through 12 all under one big roof. It's a different part of the building, but it's all under one campus. And they have these seniors walk through the halls of the elementary school where they started as kindergartners. Well, I am bawling. The teachers are bawling. The kids are crying. It was a wonderful thing, but I'm telling you, I thought my heart was going to rip out of my chest. And my son was the senior class president, so he's leading the thing. He's leading the march through the elementary halls. I was a mess, needless to say. But anyway, we get through graduation. We're all good and wonderful. And then it's time to decide on college. And my son decides he's going to go to another university that's further away, but it's still close. It's within an hour. But he's going to live on campus. He wants to move out. He wants the full college experience. And we didn't have that with the older one. He wanted to be home. So he moves out. And I remember the day that we took him to his dorm. I'm helping him pack and all this kind of stuff, weeks before. We get to his dorm, and I'm telling myself, you are not going to cry in front of this kid. You cannot do this. And I'm calling him a kid. He's an adult. But what I did to keep from just literally falling apart is when we got into his dorm room, of course, there's all these other parents moving their kids in, this, that, and the other. So just the flurry of activity is enough to distract you so you don't fall to pieces. We go up to his room, and I immediately start decorating. I'm putting things away, I'm unpacking his clothes, I'm setting up his room, even though he has a roommate. And the funny thing is, his mother is doing exactly the same thing, the other guy's mother. So we're just working, and we're working and working. Well, then it comes time to say goodbye. So I can feel this big lump in my throat because I know I'm going to walk out this door and my child is not going home with me. This is his home for the next 4 years. And I keep telling myself, Sherry, don't do it. Don't lose it in front of him because you're just going to upset him. So his brother was with us. It was my husband, my oldest son, and myself that took him there. And he comes out with us to the car, and I'm really deep down thinking, please don't walk to the car. Well, he did. And he seems okay. He seems kind of excited. Seems a little down, but seems excited. So I get in the seat, we say our goodbyes, hugs and all that. I manage to get in the car. I watch him walk in the front entrance of the dorm, and I lose it. I cried like somebody had died. I was so upset. And I cried all the way back to home, which was an hour drive. We were going to go out for some dinner. I was so distraught I couldn't eat. And that's a big thing when I can't eat. And I just cried and I cried and I cried. And then what do I do when we get home? I go into his bedroom. Why did I do that? I don't know why I did that. So I go in there and I cry most of the night, lying on his bed. So that's how I dealt with him leaving home. And then it was a progressive thing with him. So his junior and senior years of college, he was accepted into an internship program that involved him moving to Seattle for the entire summer. So that was a whole different experience because, I was used to him coming home on holidays, being home on summer break, that sort of thing. So for his last 2 summers, he was in Washington State in Seattle. But the cool thing is that his father and I and his brother and his wife, we took trips out there. Seattle is a beautiful area. We had a great time. And I really thought that my son would end up living in Seattle. And I'm thinking, how am I going to deal with this? It's bad enough that he's moving out, but he's across the country. So I was dealing with that. And then the pandemic hits. And the spring semester of his senior year, came to an abrupt end with the pandemic. They sent the students home, and the students finished out the semester online. So there was no formal graduation, it just stopped. And so we didn't experience that closure, college graduation. We did the next year, but that year we did not. And he decided, so the place where he did the internship, he was offered a full-time job. And because it was the pandemic, everyone was working remotely. So thank God he was able to stay in the state and work remotely. So at least he wasn't moving to Seattle. Not yet, anyway. So he decides to get his first apartment. And that is when I experienced the empty nest syndrome full force. He moved all of his things out. He moved his clothes out. Everything was gone. And even though I had been experiencing it, I had experienced it before, and I was gradually experiencing it with the youngest, it was a huge blow when his things were being moved out, when he was no longer living in our home full time. It was devastating. So that's my experiences with the empty nest. And I do want to talk about the strategies that I have used to help me get through it. And I will say that this doesn't work for everybody. This is just what I did. Again, you have to do what's right for you. Every situation is different. But one thing I will say starting out is there is no right way or wrong way to get through the empty nest syndrome. It's individual for everyone, for every child. It's going to be different. So you really have to be in tune with how you're feeling, the emotions. It's a loss, guys. It is a loss, and you're going to grieve. You have lost your small child. Your child is now an adult. And that's a loss. But with it being a loss, it's also an exciting new chapter. And I'll talk about how you can really embrace that in just a few minutes. So recognize that you are grieving. You may even go through the stages of grief, just like you've experienced a death. So just know that's okay. There is nothing wrong with you. Now, it may get to a point that you're having extreme depression, extreme guilt. I think I went through a very deep depression, and I seeked out the help of a professional at that point. But just know that it is okay. It is normal. You are not crazy, because you feel like you've lost your mind. You're like, so many people go through so much worse things than my child moving out. Why am I like this? But it's normal. It is totally normal. And your experience is unique to you. And it is okay. So first thing is acknowledge that you are not crazy. You are okay. And you will be okay. The second thing I would suggest is that I think it's important to reminisce to a point. But I also think it's important to not spend a great deal of time in the past. You're going to have times that you just want to experience the past. And one thing that stands out for me is that I remember when I came home, when my youngest moved out and went to college. I remember coming home that evening after I cried myself into, I don't know what, when I went into his bedroom. But I remember the house being so quiet. The silence was deafening, if that makes sense. It was so quiet. Because those guys were always goofing off and making noise and this, that, and the other. And one thing that they did, we have a big long hallway. And they had Nerf basketball rims on each end of the hallway. So they were always running up and down the hall and playing basketball with each other and this, that, and the other. And I remember we still had those up. And I remember thinking I would give anything if they were both here playing basketball in my hallway. So you really, it's healthy to reminisce and kind of process all that to a point. But it's not good when you're stuck in that. You're stuck in them as young children. You're stuck in them. You're taking them to soccer practice, to basketball practice, and all this stuff, and you just can't get past it. I remember having a really bad day at work one day after my youngest moved out permanently. And my friend and work colleague is a trained licensed therapist too. So that's how I know that's how she knew how to do this. This is one of the most helpful things for me. I was literally sitting at my desk in tears. And I have pictures of my boys all around my desk. And she comes up and she says, she picks up a picture that I had front and center on my desk of my boys when they were 16 and 6. So they were young, especially the youngest one. And they were holding my first dachshund, one of my favorite pictures. So this is a picture I saw every single day. And she says, she picks it up and she says, is it okay if I move this picture? And I'm thinking, what is she doing? And she picks it up and she takes it and puts it on the table behind me. And she takes a more recent picture of my boys as adults and she moves that in the front and center. And she said, now you don't have the constant reminder of them at another time in their life. I can't tell you what that did for me. It made all of the difference because that picture was right there where I was seeing it all the time. And I honestly was not as sad after that. And, you know, one thing that I did, I kept the pictures out of them as younger children, and I'll insert some of those so you can see, especially the one that I just described. But I found that I was replacing those with my oldest son's wedding day, the picture of us dancing, of my youngest senior picture. So I started putting pictures around my office and my home that represented the exciting life that they're in now. I mean, the way I was acting, it was like that there was a death. And there was not, thank goodness, that had not happened. They had just grown up. But I was grieving so hard I couldn't see it and I couldn't enjoy it. So one thing I would recommend is don't let the past rob you of the excitement and the joy that you will feel experiencing them as adults. The next thing I would suggest is that those of you who still have young children, I think it's extremely important that you take time, if you're still with your spouse, that you take time to work on the relationship. From the time that they're newborns all the way up until they leave the nest. Because what happens, all of us know that have children take a lot of energy. They take a lot of time. And it's really a strain on a relationship when children come along. They're blessings, but it's work. It's a lot of work. And the relationships many times just kind of go by the wayside. And I am very guilty of that. I really do blame myself many times for my marriage failing because I put so much energy into those kids. And, you know, at the time they were babies and young kids, I felt like, well, they're going to be with me forever. That's 10, 20 years down the road. It happens so quickly that you find yourself, they're gone, they're living their best life, and you look over and you're with your spouse alone for the first time in 18 years. And I will say that a lot of times you don't know who you are anymore because you've been through so much. You're 18 years, 19, 20 years older. you've experienced life. You're different. You're different people. And a lot of times if you don't work on your relationship as a couple, you lose that. I think that's why there's so many divorces after children leave home. There's just as many divorces as there are couples that remain intact, and actually they even become stronger. And I so admire when that can happen. Unfortunately, my marriage did not survive it, but really focus on the couple all through, from the time the children are newborns all the way up until they leave home, because you are going to find yourself alone in that situation again. Another thing I would suggest is you're going to have some guilt. This seems to be a real common thing. As I'm talking to other parents, we all have guilt about we weren't good enough. We would have done things differently. My major guilt, as I've described, is that I feel I was not the parent that my oldest son deserved. I have really, really struggled with that. And yes, life circumstances dictated that I was not able to be a full-time mom. I was not there emotionally for him like I should have been. I just lost my husband. But there's all sorts of guilt, especially that I was able to provide being a full-time mom, being emotionally connected with my younger one. That made the guilt even intensify. So I really went through a lot of guilt. Still going through it, actually. One thing I try to do on Christmas, as I actually did it this past Christmas, is I write letters to my children. And that includes my bonus children. And one thing I put in my oldest son's letter is that I apologized for not being there for him like I should have been, both emotionally, physically. So I'm still struggling with that. And I have some guilt too with my youngest one. I mean, I was not the perfect parent. But here's the deal. None of us are perfect parents. We're human. And we did the best we could. We honestly did the best we could at the moment that we were in it. So don't let that guilt eat you up, because we all experience it. And you know what? The kids are fine. The kids, and we can't blame ourselves if our adult child has some sort of issue. It is not our fault. It seems like society dictates that if something happens and your children don't end up to be perfect, whatever perfect is defined as, that it's somehow the parent's fault. Well, research has shown it's not as much about the parent as it is actually their peers. Their peers after a certain age have more of an influence on the type of person that they become than a lot of times the parenting. Not to say if they've been through a traumatic experience, that's different. But don't blame yourself. Don't beat yourself up. You did the best that you could. So that's another piece of advice I would give. Another piece of advice I would give is enjoy every moment. If I had it all to do over again, starting with that newborn baby, bringing that newborn baby home and not knowing what the heck to do with it, you remember that day, embrace every stage. Don't spend your time thinking, oh my gosh, my baby's growing up and he's not a newborn anymore. Enjoy the newborn phase. Enjoy the toddler phase. Enjoy school age. Enjoy every single phase of their life. And I will tell you, this may be hard to believe, especially if you don't have adult children, but having adult children is probably one of the greatest blessings I've experienced. I love having a relationship with my adult children. I love seeing what they've become. They are incredible young men. I'm asking them advice now. I'm seeing them make good decisions. I'm seeing them work through problems. I'm seeing them finally they're independent adult men, and it's a wonderful experience to see that and to be able to just have a relationship with them at this point. So it is a very exciting time as a parent when you finally work through the grief of losing their childhood and enjoying them as adults. And then the last stage, or the last piece of advice I would give to be able to survive the empty nest syndrome is learn who you are. You have been through a lot, both moms and dads, not just moms. You've been through a lot. You have raised these kids. You've done a great job. And take time for you. Learn a new skill. Focus on your health. Rekindle relationships with old friends. Travel. Do things that you just could not do when your kids were young. But take time for you. Maybe there's a hobby that you loved to do when you were younger. Well, pick that hobby back up. I will say, I was going to mention this with the relationship piece. So those marriages that don't work out after the kids leave home, one thing I would say that helped me, I experienced the empty nest syndrome, and then a few years later, my marriage dissolved. And I think the thing that helped me to kind of let go and to move on is that I moved into a different house. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody needs to do that, because sometimes it's just not financially possible, nor is it something that people want to do. They don't want to leave their home. I remember when I moved out of my home where I raised my children, that was one of the hardest days of my life. I had so many memories there. It was heartbreaking to move out of there. But now it's been almost 2 years. I have memories in this home. I love this home. This is my home. We have new memories here. We celebrate holidays as a family here. Even my ex-husband is part of those celebrations. So there's good things happening. And that's probably been one of the best things to help me move on. But what I will say is that if you are still in the home, that you were there with your spouse or your ex-spouse, and you were there with your children, some things that you can do is change things up if you so desire. That helped, because one thing I did, I kept my son's bedrooms the same for years. And then about 2 years after my youngest moved out, I decided, okay, it's time. And I made his bedroom into my my woman cave. I put a large screen TV in there. I put my house plants. I had the cockatiel in there. It was a very feminine room, and I loved it. So even if you are in the same house where your children grew up, your ex-spouse lived there with you, you can still do things to help you through that time. Make it about you. It's your home. And also, these guys right here, hey Dexter, I have a very strong maternal drive. And so I have also found that just being able to take care of these guys meets that maternal instinct that I have. So I keep getting dogs. I have 5 now. And also taking care of houseplants, that kind of satisfies that maternal instinct as well. So I hope that these tips have helped you guys. And again, remember, every experience is different, but there is life after the empty nest. I can promise you that the time is coming. You're going to love having relationships with those adult children, and you're going to love your time, because you've reached that point in life that it's about you now, and it's pretty exciting. I'll be sharing some other things with you, but it's an exciting time. So I hope this has been helpful, and if you would please comment anything you would like to say about maybe your experience, strategies that you use to help, and also any content that you'd like to see on this channel. Also put that in the comments below. That would help me to know, you know, if you want to see more about the dogs. I've actually got a special thing planned for next week featuring the pack. So I think you'll enjoy it a lot. Again, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe. And I greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. I can't put it into words how much I appreciate your support. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out if you know, you would like to see something on here. I'll try my best to bring it to you. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and I will be seeing you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.